Welcome to my new series where I tell you about the most violent deaths that you can face. I will be explaining what can happen to your body along with sensations that you might feel. This content is not for everyone. It contains graphic depictions. Viewer discretion advised. A violent death doesn't always equate to the most painful. Sometimes they do rank pretty high on the list. This video has a mix of both, but one thing is for sure, they are all very violent ways to go. "They never knew what hit them" is a phrase thrown around often when discussing submersible implosions, but that's not always true. Most of these crafts are outfitted with sensors to warn of lurking dangers, and sometimes the stressor itself clues people on board into what is about to happen. If there's an electrical failure of some kind, for instance, moves must be made to avoid plummeting quickly towards crushing depths, and if those moves fail, all that they can do is marinate in impending doom. It is now widely believed that at least some occupants on the Titan knew that they were inevitably going to meet a quick and violent end for between 48 and 71 seconds. When you try to imagine the panic, imagine it as frigid and pitch black with the other occupants toppling onto you. That's likely what happened when they began plunging vertically void of power. For every 33 feet that you dive straight down in the ocean, the surrounding weight pressing on your every inch increases by 15 pounds. A shark can inflict over 4,000 pounds of pressure with its bite, but at the depths where the Titan plummeted, it's 6,000 pounds, and that's per square inch. So when an implosion occurs at those depths, it has a 100% fatality rate, and all of the soft tissue, organs, and bone will be obliterated in milliseconds. For an idea of the devastation, a large chunk of your actual cells will burst. It's dark, but you will actually burst. Your blood, guts, and waste will explode into the bitter cold water like a human firework. Around that same time, the hydrocarbon vapors that existed inside of the sub will ignite into a mighty explosion that will shoot your liquefied remains even farther out. The only misery suffered will be the panic pre-implosion, because your brain needs a longer span of time to process painful stimuli. This is about as instant as a death can get. This is your friendly reminder that planes are statistically the safest mode of travel. Odds of dying in a plane crash are around 1 in 11 million. You might be surprised to learn that over 90% of all crashes are survivable. This is largely due to the fact that majority happen upon landing or takeoff. Once a plane is cruising between 30 and 40,000 feet, catastrophe is highly unlikely, but it does happen. In recent years, around 10% of crashes took place at or near cruising altitude. If you happen to be on board one of them, there are several things that you might experience before you ever make impact. If the cabin experiences depressurization due to a system or structural failure, the temperature on board can plummet fast. It's between -40 and -70 degrees Fahrenheit at that altitude, and the cabin will eventually equalize with that ambient temperature. If that happens, you won't have too much time to notice because you will experience hypoxia. That high up, oxygen molecules are much farther apart, which means that you will take in too little with each breath. This can lead to nausea and delirium, followed quickly by loss of consciousness. Once the plane makes impact, that will likely be the moment that your human experience ends. In high-altitude crashes, passengers are more likely to die on impact. I have read quite a few coroner reports involving this type of crash, and there are many injuries seen that are rare in other causes of death. Some of the more peculiar injuries seen include hemorrhaging within the skin caused by buttons, zippers, or even pleating of clothing, detachment of skin with sharp-edged margins indicating a sharp force injury, and petechial hemorrhaging of the trachea or larynx caused by burst surface capillaries. It's not uncommon to only recover sometimes as little as 25% of a person's remains. They sustain many life-ending injuries that occur at the moment of impact, leaving no time for the brain to process painful stimuli. The human head, which contains 22 bones, 32 teeth, carotid artery, glands, and the brain, is basically like the engine room of the ship. It's what we use to take in oxygen and experience most senses. If it fails, so does the rest of our body, so losing it is not compatible with life. In darker times, beheadings were used as executions and were carried out by either an axe or the guillotine. Today, in these parts, they are mostly caused by terrible accidents. Let's not forget that separating the head from the body is no easy feat, and it requires a lot of force. When done by axe, one try simply wasn't always successful. The unfortunate truth is that the only way that you wouldn't feel it is if you endured other trauma that rendered you unconscious. However, if in the case of something quick like the sharp blade of the guillotine, you wouldn't feel it all. In the first moment, you would be disoriented by the force and would process the sensation of immense heat generated around your neck. There might be an electrical twinge or two as the blade first hits your spinal column, but that would be all she wrote for physical feelings. Once the cervical spine is severed and your head removed, the express freeway between your nociceptors and brain is collapsed. It's now impossible to feel pain at all, but it's still not over. Because the brain itself has remained intact, it's still technically powered on. That means that you will still have sight, sound, and conscious awareness even after your head is removed. Numerous studies have given us the hypothesis that this will happen for an additional 8 to 14 seconds. Let's just hope that isn't enough time to understand what happened. Today's estimate suggests that over 100 million landmines are still planted in the ground at this very moment. 7,000 people still die annually to them, and most fatalities are a result of terrible luck. These gifts from hell were first used in the American Civil War, which means the US is not free from their deadly potential. First off, never trust a movie's portrayal because it is the pressure of your weight that detonates, not its release. I suppose that is far less suspenseful. These death devices don't just throw around fire nados. Some contain shrapnel that turns into sharp metal bullets hurling through your soft tissue and even bone. 33% of victims die, sometimes not so quick deaths, and nearly the rest survive, but with life-altering injuries and complications. The unfortunate truth is that any one of us could be taking an evening stroll when the overpowering force, searing fragments, and thermal abuse tosses us around like a tidal wave of molten needles. Your head will pound from the high-frequency ear-ringing brought on by the sound of the blast. Initially, your mind will tailspin before it's overcome by the systemic agony of second and third degree widespread burns. The rough landing will reassault any and all wounds. If you aren't robbed of your eyesight, it will be shrouded by blood and smoke. Because it's the first area to absorb the blast, your foot or even lower leg may be blown off. A vast percentage of fatalities occur from bleeding to death, and the time frame can vary from 1 minute to hours. Of course, this sounds frightening, but remember, 7,000 out of nearly 8 billion people makes the odds very low. If you ever encounter a warning sign, do not enter, and the chances are high that you will live out the rest of your life without ever encountering one. The head of a hammer is made of steel that has been heat treated to be especially sturdy and hard, so that sucker's going to hurt. The average force of a hammer hitting a nail is 100 pounds, but nobody uses full strength. Just imagine the shocking brute force of a really enraged strong person. You won't see it coming because in most cases it's a sneak attack. You'll simply hear the scuffing of their shoes and... If the first is the fatal blow, you'll hear the crunch of your skull and experience the prelude of an explosion absorbed through the cap of your head, and then it would be lights out. If not, you'll be bitten by a crescendoing twinge at the base of your skull, followed by pure electricity extending down into your nose and eyeballs. Even though the point of contact was the top back of your skull, the reverberating force is causing some serious inflammation and contusions to form beneath both eyes. It was also enough to cause a counter-coup injury to your brain. In reaction to the hit, your brain basically ricocheted off the front of your skull, resulting in hemorrhaging and bruising to the tissue. You'll instinctively grab your wound to be met with gooey, warm oozing. You think you can feel a gaping wound, but is it blood, brain matter, or both sticking to your fingers? As you try to make heads or tails of your grim reality, your assailant will be panicking, wondering how you're still standing. They have no idea that you're actually considering that you were struck by lightning because every bone from the collar up is radiating with white-hot electrical bursts. Now you also taste rusty pennies because the smash caused your teeth to chomp right through your spongy tongue, even severing the tip. It's pulsating and swelling like an engorged water bead. Suddenly, you feel your face fly towards the concrete and you catch a glimpse of your skull and brain debris flying. The second blow has been dealt, and the trauma is too much to be compatible with life. I'm not talking about your grandpa's hand-cranked grinder. Instead, imagine a made-for-factory monster that stands taller than you. Inside are jumbo, sharp blades powered to spin hundreds of times per minute. These suckers can handle frozen chunks, cartilage, and bone. They are not compatible with human life. As horrifying as it sounds, head first would bring this horror show to an end the quickest. The moment that your head hits, you will feel so much pressure in your nostrils that it almost offers a distinct smell. Your ears will ring with muffled metal movement in the background. You're only seeing snapshots of metallics and clotting blood as your mind chaotically races, unable to calibrate. Your own instincts will cause you to feed your hands into the blades. Your mind has only let you believe that you've suffered a normal fall. You reach for what you think is the stationary ground. It's quite effortless for the blades to pulverize your finger bones, giving way to waves of hot electric-like hellfire. Traumatic fractures often exhibit with an electric-like pain. Though the now minced veins and arteries in your hands are spitting blood in your face, you still can't grasp reality. You're also a little preoccupied as your hair tangles around the rotating blades, which is ripping parts of your scalp from your head. This offers sensations of hydrofluoric acid eating away at your tissue. But who can keep up as a nuclear-sized explosion rips through your ear canals as the tiny bones in your middle ear buckle to the power? Your final waking moment will be filled with a soundtrack of your jaw and skull bones crackling and crumbling. The vibration will reverberate through what remains of your head. There are layers and layers to your throat that can bring on layers of horrifying sensations. Dare I say that it can be the worst place to receive a sharp force injury? A penetrating gaping wound from ear to ear would require a lot of force, which is the very first thing that you would feel. This can be confusing and often initially seems more like a throat punch. It isn't until moments later when a warm fluid oozes down your shirt and a slowly crescendoing searing begins grazing your tissue that you'll realize that you're in way more trouble than you initially thought. When it comes to traumatic injuries, it's typically when the realization hits us that we begin to tune into the sensations. Now that your brain is no longer hiding behind a veil of disorientation, your experience will become unique. If the blade severed your trachea, then you're staring down asphyxiation. Blood is flooding into your airways and aspirating into lung tissue. It's all plugged up, which makes it impossible for air to get in or out. You'll feel like a heap of molten glass has been forced down your gullet, and that searing will intensify to a maddening level. There will be an immense bursting pressure in your chest as trapped air infiltrates your outer tissue. This is known as subcutaneous emphysema. If your carotid artery is severed, you are now bleeding out at a rapid rate, and you're also staring down exsanguination. This one is now winning the race, and in addition to suffocation, you are being smothered with a blanket of weakness and nausea. Your head will surely pound and pulsate. It might even feel like a hammer is crashing into the top of your skull. Your brain isn't receiving any oxygen. Death can arrive in as little as 10 seconds, but misery can stretch on for minutes. It all depends on the extent of your internal injuries. The hippopotamus can chomp down on you like a double-sided hydraulic press, applying over 1,800 pounds per inch of pressure. Their mouths are huge, which means they could fit about half of an average-height human inside of it. Want to add insult to injury? Their sharp canine and incisors, otherwise known as their tusks, can be up to 20 inches long. They can, in fact, bite a person in half all the way through. Think you might just try to outrun them? Well, on a good day, you might set a pace of 8 miles per hour, but a hippo can easily do 19 on a bad one. Some can reach up to 28. There really are no quick deaths. Like I said, their bite is like the jaws of life. Aside from being chomped in half, you are also simultaneously being crushed. Your flesh, meat, organs, and bone are being masticated and grinded until you feel like flimsy paper being hole punched over and over. Just imagine being out on the water one moment with the sun warming your skin, but the next, your world goes dark and slimy, your nostrils burn with the foul odor of a giant's rotten breath, and you are overcome with this crushing sensation laced with multiple stab wounds from hell. Your end would be in the form of multiple sharp force injuries, possible amputations, crushing, and finally drowning. But they are still so cute.